In the first year of Russian assault of Ukraine, Russia took territories, and then every advance stopped. In 2024, Russian army start offensive that is giving some result. The only unclear thing is that Russia is advancing by taking smaller settlements. Are the bigger settlements the only strongholds that can stop Russia? In this video, we will analyze scenarios that frontline come to the cities. During the ongoing war in Ukraine, Russia has captured several cities with populations over 50,000 people. Some of the key cities include Mariupol, pre-war population, 430,000 inhabitants. Mariupol is a strategic port city on the Sea of Azov. Russia took control after a siege that lasted for several months in 2022. The main defense of Mariupol was focused in the east, but the Russian army approached from the direction of Crimea and captured the city with relative ease. Severodonetsk, pre-war population, 100,000 inhabitants, is a key city in the Luhansk region. It was captured by Russian forces after intense fighting in June 2022. Lysychansk, pre-war population, 95,000 inhabitants, was taken by Russians following the fall of Severodonetsk. Russia captured Lysychansk in July 2022, giving them control over much of the Luhansk region. Melitopol, pre-war population, 150,000 inhabitants, is the city in the Zaporizhia region that was taken by Russian forces early in the invasion, around March 2022. Berdyansk, pre-war population, 100,000 inhabitants, is a port city on the Sea of Azov. Berdyansk was captured by Russia during the early stages of the war without fights. Kherson, pre-war population, 280,000 inhabitants, was strategically important due to its proximity to Crimea and access to the Dnipro River, and it was captured in March 2022 but was later recaptured by Ukrainian forces in November 2022 during a counteroffensive. Rubizn, pre-war population, 60,000 inhabitants, is a city in the Luhansk region captured in 2022 during Russia's push in the Donbass. All these cities were captured at early stages of the conflict, without being heavily damaged during prolonged sieges and battles. In year 2023, the largest city that was taken by the Russian is Bakhmut after several months of heavy fighting. In this part of conflict was involved Wagner Group as an elite private military unit. Ukrainian resistance was strong almost to the end of the battle. At the end, Russia captured Bakhmut, but the price for Bakhmut was big. As a result of the battle, Wagner Group had a march to Moscow as the heaviest incident at Russian side. In 2024 was taken Avdiivka after months of resistance. Avdiivka was closed to front line that was established in 2014, and Ukrainians made Avdiivka stronghold for further Russian advance. Battle finished in the moment when Ukrainian side decided to take back before having stronger losses. The war in Ukraine is a war of attrition. The question arises as to which city will be next for the Russians to capture. For the Russians, the priority is Donbass. In the Donetsk region, the larger cities that remain under Ukrainian control are Pokrovsk, Koshchetinivka, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk. However, for a Russian victory, it is necessary to capture larger cities, and Kharkiv is often mentioned first. Kharkiv is near the Russian border, a city with a population of over 1 million, and the second largest in Ukraine. Odessa is also frequently mentioned. Odessa is far from the current front lines, located west of the Dnipro River on the Black Sea coast, near the Moldovan border. To reach Odessa, the Russian army would need to cross the Dnipro River, likely at the point of Kherson, which they had previously captured. Afterward, they would have to take Mykolaiv before reaching the Odessa region. Odessa is more than 200 kilometers away from the territories where Russian troops are currently stationed. The capture of all these cities implies a long period of time and significant resources that the Russians would need to expend in order to improve their positions to the point where Putin could somewhat claim they had achieved some kind of victory. However, this does not change the key issue, which is that Ukraine has become an anti-Russian state, as it has been since the 2014 conflict, and it is unclear how the Russian Federation will be able to overcome this aspect of the Ukrainian state. Even if the Russians manage to take Donbass along with Odessa and Kharkiv, Moscow will still be just 300 kilometers from Ukraine and a vulnerable target for potential future conflicts. This means that the Russians will likely demand that Ukraine be disarmed after the war, which is also problematic. During the Cold War, Soviet urban warfare doctrine evolved significantly, drawing lessons from World War II, but also adapting to the potential for conflict in the nuclear age and against highly mechanized armies. The Soviet methodology for capturing cities during this period combined elements of conventional warfare with innovations reflecting the strategic environment of the Cold War. The Soviet military strategy relied heavily on the massive use of firepower, especially when it came to artillery and air power. Soviet forces placed great emphasis on overwhelming the enemy with powerful artillery barrages and air strikes to weaken urban defenses before launching ground assaults. This approach was designed to minimize Soviet casualties by reducing enemy resistance before troops even entered the battlefield. During the Second War in Chechnya, Russia made massive use of firepower, employing heavy artillery assaults, and Chechen fighters withdrew from the cities, allowing the Russian army to enter Chechen towns with little resistance. It's important to note that another reason for the Russian army's easier victory, compared to the First Chechen War, was that for the people of Chechnya, the radical Islamist factor had become a burden, and they no longer supported radical Islam. Russian intelligence services took advantage of this, and by using this tactic, they relatively quickly crushed the Chechen resistance and established an order that remains in power to this day. Second key strategies of the Soviet army theory during the Cold War was the deep battle doctrine and the use of operational maneuver groups. The main idea was to achieve maximum mobility and speed, with the goal of rapidly penetrating enemy defenses and encircling large urban areas. Operational maneuver groups were mechanized forces capable of striking deep into enemy lines. Rather than directly assaulting heavily fortified cities, these units aimed to bypass them, encircle them, and cut off supply and reinforcement routes, forcing the enemy to surrender through isolation. The ultimate objective was to avoid the long and costly sieges, like those seen in World War II, by quickly surrounding and neutralizing cities without prolonged engagement. If direct assault was deemed too costly or impractical, Soviet forces would employ siege tactics, encircling a city, cutting off supplies, and bombarding it until the defenders were forced to surrender. Encircling cities is a tactic we haven't seen from Russia in recent history. The war in Ukraine has transitioned into a prolonged war of attrition, with Russia focusing on capturing smaller settlements while slowly advancing toward larger strategic cities. Early in the conflict, Russia managed to capture key urban centers with relatively minimal resistance, but as the war progressed, capturing cities like Bakhmut and Avdiivka required much more time, effort, and resources. Despite some gains, the Russian military faces significant challenges. Larger cities, like Kharkiv and Odessa, remain critical objectives, but are difficult to capture due to their size, strong Ukrainian defenses, and logistical challenges posed by geography. Historically, Russian and Soviet military doctrine has relied on massive firepower, sieges, and encirclements to capture urban centers. This was evident in earlier conflicts like Chechnya, where heavy artillery bombardments and the exploitation of internal divisions led to decisive victories. However, the situation in Ukraine is different. Even if Russia captures more cities, the underlying issue remains unresolved. Ukraine has become firmly anti-Russian, and any military gains will not easily reverse this reality. Moscow may find itself facing a heavily militarized Ukraine, just kilometers from its own borders, leading to future vulnerabilities. Additionally, any attempt to disarm Ukraine as a post-war condition will likely face substantial resistance, both from Ukraine and the international community. The biggest challenge for the Russian army will be capturing cities. Currently, the Russians are managing to take villages and smaller settlements. But how the Russian military will handle the situation when they reach larger cities remains to be seen in the coming period. It is expected that the Russians will try to avoid direct urban combat in major cities. However, cities like Pokrovsk will inevitably need to be taken. If there are no significant issues on the Ukrainian side, the assault on Pokrovsk may not begin until next year. Should the Ukrainians choose to defend Pokrovsk, the city is likely to suffer heavy damage in future battles, and it could remain under Ukrainian control until the end of spring 2025 at the latest. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis on global events. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.